When most people think about the EU, they usually assume that it includes every European country. However, that is not entirely accurate. Surprisingly, some European nations have chosen to remain outside the EU despite being geographically located in Europe. I just happen to be curious about just how many people walk around out there thinking that the EU is a union of all regional countries. If you also thought that was the case, then come along as we delve into this narrative and explore 3 of the wealthiest and most influential countries on the continent that are not part of the EU. I'm talking about Switzerland, Iceland, and Norway. Although there are more countries that are not part of the EU, we will focus on these 3 nations that have intentionally opted to stay out of the EU. And it is fascinating to understand why. What are the reasons that have prevented them from becoming EU members? I can't keep you guessing any longer, so let's dig into this intriguing topic right now when Asinga Unfolds. Hi there, welcome back to Asinga Unfolds. Now, before we go any further, I would like you to understand what the EU is so that you can differentiate it from Europe. The EU is short for the European Union. So, how did the Union come into existence? The Union's origins are deeply rooted in the desire for peace and economic cooperation following the devastation of World War II. After 2 world wars that ravaged Europe, leaders reorganized the need for a more unified and cooperative continent to prevent further conflict. The idea was that countries that trade and work together would have less incentive to go to war. It began with the European Coal and Steel Community, or ECSC in short, during the early 50s, which brought together 6 founding members. You had Belgium, France, Germany or West Germany at that time, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The ECSC was designed to control coal and steel production, key industries for war efforts, to ensure no single country could arm itself for conflict without others noticing. From this initiative, Europe started to take its first steps towards broader economic integration. Some individuals or gentlemen such as Jean Monnet, a French political economist, and Robert Schuman, the French foreign minister, are often credited as the founding fathers of this vision. Schuman's declaration on May 9, 1950, which proposed the ECSC, is celebrated as Europe Day, marking the origins of what would eventually become the European Union. But before becoming known as the EU, the ECSC had another transition. Remember, this union is 75 years old or thereabouts, depending on when you're watching this video, or subscribing to this channel, and it has had many changes over such a long lifespan. The real evolution came with the formation of the European Economic Community, or EEC in short. The year was 1957, under the Treaty of Rome. The ECSC became the EEC, while expanding on similar goals and bringing on new ones, such as aiming for broader economic integration by establishing a common market. This meant the gradual removal of tariffs and trade barriers between member states and the free movement of goods, services, labor, and capital. The EEC laid the foundation for unprecedented economic growth and cooperation among its members, which attracted more countries to join over time. The EEC grew in size, and by 1992, it reached a historic milestone with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty, formally creating the European Union, or as we refer to it most of the time, the EU. The Maastricht Treaty didn't just unify Europe economically, but also politically, setting up the framework for a common foreign and security policy, justice and home affairs cooperation, and the introduction of the euro as a common currency. Today, the EU has 27 member states and is one of the world's largest and most powerful economic blocs, with over 447 million citizens and a combined GDP of more than 15 trillion euros as per 2022 World Bank report. The EU is a global powerhouse in trade, diplomacy, and regulatory policies. Statistics show that the EU has become the world's largest single market, bragging a share of about 15% of global trade. For countries within the EU, being a part of this massive market means access to a vast customer base, strong protection for industries, and a collective voice that can influence global regulations. The success of the EU has made it highly desirable for many European countries. The Union's political stability, economic benefits, and access to the world's largest single market make membership a strategic goal for many nations. EU membership opened doors to greater financial security, regional cooperation, and enhanced global standing. Countries like Poland, Hungary, and the Baltic states have benefited enormously from EU structural funds aimed at boosting economies and modernizing infrastructure. However, joining the EU is not easy, and not all countries meet the requirements. You thought being geographically located in Europe was the only requirement. The EU has strict criteria, known as the Copenhagen criteria, established in 1993, that a country must meet before joining. I will save you time so you don't have to go through that right now, but let me list a key few things for this video. So, for European countries that wish to join the EU, the following must be in check. 1. Stable institutions that guarantee democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for minorities. 2nd, a functioning market economy that can cope with competitive pressures within the EU. 3rd, the ability to adapt and implement the EU's body of laws known as the Acquis Communautaire. This set of requirements explains why countries in the Western Balkans, like Albania and North Macedonia, have been pursuing EU membership for years but face challenges in meeting these political, economic, and legal standards. Even though they are geographically European, their path to membership has been slowed by issues like corruption, political instability, and economic readiness. So, we now know what the EU is and how far it has come. We also know that being a European country doesn't automatically guarantee EU membership. There are strict requirements to meet. We have explored the benefits that come with joining the EU, and it raises a key question. Do these countries, Switzerland, Iceland, and Norway, fall short of some of the EU's criteria? Is that why they are not member states? At first glance, it might seem like these countries are missing something. Maybe they don't meet the economic or political standards set by the EU. But here's where things get interesting. Not only do Switzerland, Iceland, and Norway meet the requirements, but they exceed them in many ways. In fact, These countries often rank higher than some EU member states when it comes to wealth, governance, and quality of life. So, if these countries are more than capable of joining the EU, why do they remain outside the Union? Before we take a closer look at each individual country, allow me to welcome you to our growing community. You can also join by simply clicking the glowing button below this video that says subscribe. When you subscribe to our channel, also click on the bell icon to turn on post notifications so that each time we post a new video, you get notified. Alright, now, where should we start? Switzerland. The land of banking, Swiss watches, chocolate, and the Alps. Switzerland is an economic powerhouse in Europe. The country is known for its banking sector, high standard of living, political neutrality, and geographically at the heart of Europe. It has more than everything European countries need to become EU members, but yet it remains out. Despite not being an EU member, Switzerland's relationship with the EU is complex and very close. The country has signed more than 120 bilateral agreements with the EU, giving it access to parts of the EU's single market. This allows Switzerland to participate in areas such as trade, research, and the free movement of people without officially being a member. This explains why Swiss citizens can live and work freely in EU countries and vice versa. In terms of trade, over 50% of Switzerland's exports go to the EU, and about 70% of its imports come from the EU. Collaborating on key regional issues between the two parties has been more than good, but calling for the removal of any remaining barriers between the EU and Switzerland, and at some point we got so close to seeing the two become one. One of the most pivotal moments in Switzerland's EU story came in 1992. The country was on the brink of joining the European Economic Area, also known as EEA in short, which would have integrated it into the EU's single market, much like Norway and Iceland. But in a national referendum, Swiss voters narrowly rejected the idea, with 50.3% voting against joining the EEA. This vote reflected the Swiss people's fear of losing political independence and sovereignty. Switzerland has a strong tradition of direct democracy, meaning citizens have a lot of power over political decisions through referendums. Many Swiss people were concerned that joining the EEA and eventually the EU would mean ceding too much control to Brussels. I can also tell you that the decision to stay out of the EU didn't only revolve around sovereignty but also neutrality. Switzerland has maintained a strict policy of neutrality for centuries by avoiding involvement in military alliances and conflicts. While the EU is primarily an economic and political union, its member states also coordinate on defense and foreign policy issues. Many Swiss see this as a potential threat to their long-standing position of neutrality. In recent years, however, there have been negotiations between Switzerland and the EU for an institutional framework agreement. A deal that would have streamlined Swiss-EU relations broke down. Switzerland walked away from the talks, citing concerns over sovereignty and pressure from Brussels to adopt EU rules without having direct say in their formation. This collapse meant that Switzerland's access to the EU market remained dependent on those bilateral agreements, but without further expansion or deepening of ties. Many see this as a defining moment where Switzerland once again reinforced its choice to stay out of the EU, preferring bilateral cooperation over full membership. Despite walking away from the deal, Switzerland still works a fine line. It is enjoying many of the benefits of EU membership without the full responsibilities or loss of sovereignty. However, the question remains, how sustainable is this position? As the EU continues to evolve, Switzerland's relationship with the Union remains delicate. And while it benefits greatly from access to the single market, it consistently reaffirms its decision to remain independent. Let's move on to the next. We will explore Iceland, a country that came close to joining the EU, but ultimately chose a different path. Iceland, a Nordic island nation with a population of just over 370,000, is known for its strong fishing industry, the mesmerizing northern lights, and where many of the sagas that reference the legendary Viking Ragnar were written many centuries later. Despite its size, Iceland plays an important role in Europe's economic and environmental landscape. While it's not an EU member, Iceland has close ties to the Union through its membership in the European Economic Area and Schengen Agreement. As part of the EEA, Iceland enjoys full access to the EU single market, which allows for the free movement of goods, services, people and capital. This gives Iceland many of the economic benefits of EU membership without officially being part of the Union. Just like Switzerland, there was a time when things seemed better if the two had become one. In the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, Iceland's banking sector collapsed, and the country experienced severe economic turmoil. Later in 2009, Iceland's government applied for EU membership, seeing the Union as a potential lifeline to stabilize its economy and gain access to the euro. At that very time, many in Iceland believed that joining the EU and adopting the euro would provide greater financial security and prevent future economic meltdowns. So, talks began, and Iceland's membership seemed like a real possibility. However, the country's relationship with the EU quickly soured. The major sticking point in Iceland's potential EU membership was its fishing industry, which is central to the country's economy. Remember, fishing accounts for about 40% of Iceland's exports, and the nation is fiercely protective of its waters and fishing quotas. EU membership would have required Iceland to comply with the Common Fisheries Policy, or CFP in short, which manages fish stocks across the Union's waters. This policy is seen as problematic by many Icelanders, as it would mean opening their valuable fishing grounds to other EU countries. Many in Iceland feared this would lead to overfishing and loss of control over critical national resource. By 2013, as Iceland's economy began to recover, public support for joining the EU dwindled. That same year, the Icelandic government formally withdrew its application to join the EU, citing concerns over the fisheries and a lack of desire to cede sovereignty to Brussels. In similar terms to Switzerland's situation, Iceland feared loss or foreign intervention for its geopolitical and economic independence. This country's geographic isolation in the North Atlantic has shaped its identity as an independent nation. While close to Europe, Iceland has long resisted being tied too closely to the continent's political structures. This independence is also reflected in its military neutrality, because Iceland has no standing army and relies on NATO for defense. Despite that, Iceland has managed to recover from the financial crisis without EU membership, in part due to its control over its natural resources and its successful tourism industry. The country's geothermal energy and fisheries provide a strong economic base, allowing it to remain outside the EU while still benefiting from EEA agreements, making it yet another nation with strong ties but a clear choice. On to our last stop, Norway. Known for its stunning, rich natural Viking ancestry, high standard of living, and several World Heritage sites, the country has a close relationship with the EU, despite not being a member. Like Iceland, Norway is part of the European Economic Area, which allows it to access the EU single market. Norway benefits from free movement of goods, services, and people, which has helped its economy thrive. However, this access comes with the requirements to adopt many EU regulations without having a direct say in their creation. Unlike Switzerland and Iceland, Norway has held 2 national referendums on EU membership. The first was held in 1972, when 53.5% of voters rejected EU membership over concerns centered around issues like fishing rights and sovereignty. Norway's fishing industry was worried about losing control over its territorial waters to EU regulations. The second was in 1994. This was even closer, with 52.2% voting against joining the EU. By this time, the debate had shifted somewhat. While economic benefits were a focal point, sovereignty and the desire to maintain control over key national resources remained significant concerns. Yet, in both cases, Norwegian citizens opted against joining the EU. The other key issue at play was Norway's desire to protect its rich natural resources, such as oil, gas, and fisheries. Being one of the largest oil and gas producers in Europe incentivized this decision. The Norwegian government prioritizes maintaining control over its oil wealth, which has allowed it to create a sovereign wealth fund that invests in various global markets. This fund, known as the Government Pension Fund Global, is one of the largest in the world. But it wasn't just about oil and gas. Like Iceland, Norway places great importance on its fishing industry. Membership in the EU would require Norway to adhere to the common fisheries policy that I mentioned about earlier in this video, which could jeopardize their fishing rights and the opening of their waters to the rest of the EU members. Despite not being an EU member, Norway enjoys a special relationship with the Union. As part of the EEA, Norway participates in various EU programs and contributes to the EU budget, often without having a direct influence on the policies that affect it. Norway also has a unique agreement with the EU regarding Schengen. While it's part of the Schengen area, it has not fully adopted all the rules that EU member states must follow. This allows for easier travel while maintaining some control over immigration. The country's story is one of balancing economic collaboration with the EU while fiercely protecting its sovereignty and resources. We have made other videos that explore many European issues, from currency to population and more. Topics from the southern part of the continent all the way to the north. Check out the description below for more Europe-related videos. If you don't want to know more about Europe for now, then check out our recent video that explores a tech company that has grown to surpass other renowned tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Google's Alphabet. The thing that surprised me about that story was that this company has been in the hands of a man who was once a dishwasher. It is very fascinating and you should not miss it.